Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of Social Justice in Women's Hockey. We had a special where we spoke with the one, the only, Bria Felician, and of course, K-Train, Kelsey Trainer. And we talked about social justice in women's soccer as the Challenge Cup was happening and some of what transpired and the conversations that were generated by a very emotional moment shared by Julie Ertz and her teammate, Casey Short. You want to check out that video? Right there. The following week, I had a conversation about social justice in women's basketball. And actually, it's one of my favorite videos, that video. It's one of my favorites, if I'm being honest, because I talk about this book right here, Freedom's Daughters. And prior to the WNBA season starting, a lot of the conversations have been around, finally, right? Finally, we reached the conversation where people are talking about women's basketball and saying, hey, they've been doing this for a while. Freedom's Daughters, let me bring this up to you for you again. Freedom's Daughters, the unsung heroines of the civil rights movement from 1830 to 1970. So even this is not comprehensive anymore because we can go 2020 and I'm sure beyond. My point is that Black women, whether WNBA players, civil rights activists, they have been carrying the water of social justice for so long, and oftentimes without any respect, without any recognition. And then a movement becomes as mainstream as movements can come, and the women that laid the foundation are oftentimes forgotten in history. But my interpretation is, particularly, and maybe I'm more hopeful, but my hope is that the 2020 WNBA season is breaking that cycle. So I'm really proud of the last episode. I'm not so proud that I didn't do such a great job promoting it, but I'm doing that now because it's one of my favorites. So please go check it out. That was a softer one. Did I mention I love bubbles? Anya, you know that I have wanted to have you on this special that I'm doing, Social Justice in Women's Hockey, for quite some time, but the day has arrived. We are here.
It's here.
It's here. We are here to talk about social justice in women's hockey. But first, I want to ask you a question that I did not ask you for the 9, but you talked about all the Wubble baby content. I mean, I'm thinking maybe there's a reason that you're gravitating towards that. You soon will have some baby content of your own. Yes. How are you and Mad Pack feeling? Like, what's the anticipation like for Baby Packer?
Madison went to her first doctor's appointment because COVID basically kept her out of the doctor forever. So she went to her first doctor's appointment the other day and she was like, is this baby coming early maybe? And they were like, no. They were like, you want it to come on time. And she was like, you're sure it's not coming early? Because that would be really exciting if it was early. And they were like, no, like aim for your due date, you loser. So we were literally like, we left like so dejected. We were like, oh, this baby's coming on time. So we're very excited for this boy. The whole room has been done since like April because we've been locked in this house. So we've got a lot. And then like Madison will come home with something. She's like, this is perfect for hockey games. I'm like, why are you buying something for a hockey? Like, what size is he going to be? She's like, I'm not sure, but this looks cute. So anyway, we have more Packer baby content that's coming down the pipeline. He's going to be, I got him a shirt actually that was like here for the likes. It's amazing. It's amazing. He's going to be clickbait.
My goodness. Yeah. So have you decided? So I have a good friend of mine, actually my college teammate. She just had her beautiful baby girl and has dedicated now her Instagram is Baby Joy's Instagram. Like that's, so there's no more Brit. Brit is gone from the Insta, from the gram. She gone. and it's all the baby. Like, are you gonna do that, or are you gonna create? Is there gonna be a separate account, or are you just gonna?
I created a Packer baby account.
I mean,
No,
you
I
say
think I bet you my Instagram's just gonna go away because I'll be so much less relevant. I'll have a baby. So it'll be maybe I'll do like every sixth picture I'll put my half of my face in it. A piece of my arm. Yeah. Yeah. Like I still exist. Like, you know, like I'll put, like it won't put like subliminal messages like warning signs, but no.
Oh my gosh.
He'll be on my gram. Madison has like a whole section of his wardrobe that's just similar to her wardrobe. So we're gonna do like matching pack and pack pics. So I can't imagine that he gets voted, but he's gonna be stuck with moms for a long time.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, crotch pants, a slouchy hat, and like the same shirt.
What?
Like
Okay. At first, when you were talking about like baby coming early, I was like, no, we don't want that. But now I don't know. Now
yeah, we might want that.
In like the safest and healthiest way possible, but like
I agree. I said that to Maddie. I was like, you know what would be great if he was perfectly safe and healthy, but born in August and not mid-September. She was like, yeah, we were both like sitting on the couch and we were like, I agree.
Yeah,
and then we were like, do you think that's a good idea, dude? And he was like,
yeah, what are you feeling?
He's like, nah, I'm good right here.
So switching gears completely.
We don't want to stay on that topic for the whole time.
I know, right? We should have built out more time for baby power. That was amateur hour. We'll just have to have you back. That's all. But you know, we did have Madison on alongside Moose, of course, for the last installment of the hockey edition. I dabbled into some soccer talk last time, and we got some W content coming as well. But generally speaking, Anya, I mean, social justice in women's sports, I think, is a very different conversation than it is perceived, I want to say, at the national level for sports, men's sports leagues. And that being that girls and women in sport, whether it's women's sports leagues or men's sports leagues, almost are always at this constant, you know, advocacy for themselves and for others. So just coming from that lens first, when you see what's happening in the Challenge Cup, got it right this time, but then also what the WNBA has planned. First, just your reactions to how those women's sports leagues were able to step up and have an important conversation, but then also what would you like for the NWHL as it returns in the fall or how would you like the NWHL to maybe embrace some of that, but in something that's very relevant to the culture of hockey?
First, women's sports are always fighters. You said it, like we're fighting for salary, we're fighting for equal pay, we're fighting for equal visibility. So there's already this chip on female athletes' shoulders where they're willing to just get dirty and fight. And I think that naturally just goes right into what we're doing in social equity. Is women are so comfortable to say this is unequal or this is unjust and this is how we want to change and this is how we're going to use our platforms for more than an athlete, for more than being the hockey player or the soccer player or the basketball player, but for Black Lives Matter or for Say Her Name or for these different causes. And even beyond that or before that was mental health or pay equity or all these different things that women just champion. They're champions because they're winners and they're better and I love them. But because women are willing to say something that's uncomfortable because they're not afraid of backlash. They want to push the conversation. So I think what's happened in the NWSL has been super empowering that they've taken that stance and they've changed a lot of cultural opinions on what kneeling looks like and what you can and can't wear and these stupid rules that came out. You know, you're not wearing an approved t-shirt because it says I can't breathe or you're kneeling and that's not allowed anymore. They've made that normalized by being the first person to do it. So they've done a great service. And I think that what the W is doing is then trickling into the NBA, which then gets all the clout, but obviously started in the W and started from a woman that was willing to push an uncomfortable conversation. But it's great, right? The N's picking it up, and then when the NBA picks it up, then it's everywhere. So, you never say boo when good, positive social justice moves forward. But you can't forget my girl Angel, who's doing the most, and that's important. I think for me, and I've talked about this with you before, but it's about doing something that's authentic, that doesn't take away from the conversation or make any form of a derivative. So if it's something that we're going to do, it needs to be whole and it needs to be completely unified. When we have those off-cuff conversations that maybe are just emotional or in the moment or not, that aren't genuine to our vantage point. When you see that image blasted everywhere in the NWSL, you think, was that genuine? Are you pushing a genuine conversation, or is that good clickbait or what have you? So I think what we want to do is ensure that it's genuine and that when the conversation comes from the action, it's positive and it's correct. It's not about this person's kneeling or this person's not, or this patch is there, this person's not wearing it. It's the entire league has a uniform approach to how we're going to push our social justice and our social equities and support what we need to support. So I think that right off the bat is the number one most important thing to me, that there's no derivative conversation and there's only love and support, which is hard.
Right.
It's only the weight of the world on my shoulders, but it's super important. And I think it starts from having the right conversations with the right voices and asking uncomfortable questions so that you can find answers that get you to a place of actually understanding.
Yeah. I think what really is important in what you said, for me at least, is that authenticity, right? Bringing the authenticity, because then I think it opens up conversation. For a long time, we've seen sports leagues try to be inclusive and do so in a way that, generally speaking, can be positive. But if it's just, I've got a NHL flag behind me somewhere, if it's just kind of that flag waving, that can be difficult for some people, because it's not pushing a conversation that makes them every day feel less fearful that they will be ridiculed, that they will be singled out, that they will be harmed physically, emotionally, because of who they are and who and how they choose to love. And I think that's the same when we talk about racism. So the thing that I found very interesting is that it seems that Moose has been really promoting conversations on what that could look like, not just in the NWHL, but even for the Riveters very specifically. And so she mentioned kind of petitioning to have the logo be more representative, not just for the sake of Black fans and fans of color, but also to be more representative of history. And when I put that episode out, as we were putting that out live, I think people reacted and there was a concern that that could be almost like a form of blackface. I want to ask you, the question that I want to ask you is, what do you know of the history of Black women as Rosie? And if something like that were to be taken on by the league, what do you think would be the opportunity that is created by having a more representative version of Rosie the Riveter in the National Women's Hockey League?
Yeah, I think it opens a lot of conversations, because when you look at Rosie the Riveter, who historically was a white figure, you're ignoring the fact that before that Rosie the Riveter image came out, there were Black women doing it. And that was something I learned actually through your podcast and through the video is it forces a conversation where you educate yourself. Historically, yes, that was the image that we had, and that was the woman that we thought of. But that's because we weren't championing Black images at that time. It's not because we want to take an image, paint its face Black, and say, well, now it's Black Rosie. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to change who Rosie the Riveter was, but we're also trying to honor who was before her and who was still and always will be the silent worker in America. And that is women of color, and that's Black women, because they're the most underpaid, they're the most under-respected, they're the most underprivileged, and they're the most under-listened to. And that's where there has to be a systemic change. But if we can do our part in educating, I think that it's an interesting way to pay the right respects. And then it adds the other layer of, is the conversation going to be derailed to this different place? And that's where we have to understand its authenticity. How are we educating in a way that people are getting how much Black women have done to build this economy and this world and this America that we know now? And how little were they respected for it? Mm-hmm. And how do we pay that respect appropriately? So I always think that that's a really positive conversation to get involved with. And I think that it's important. So I don't know the answer. As I don't know the answer, is that I want to learn more and continue to educate myself to know, if the Riveters home and away jersey are what they are, and they're a Black image or a white image, then maybe we roll out a third jersey. Maybe we roll out another way. Maybe we roll out something else that also honors the culture of Black history without making Rosie the Riveter seemingly blackface, because that's not appropriate either. So there's so many pieces to that pie that I think are extremely interesting, but what it starts with is educating. And you can't do any of those actions just by having a girl with locks now the face of the Riveters, because it immediately seems disingenuous. It immediately seems like a group of people with white guilt trying to solve a problem. And it can't be that. It needs to be what it really is an education, and it needs to be correct, and it needs to come with the right amount of respect. So it's, although touchy, it's necessary.
Yeah, I think what you said is so important. And, ZR King, she is a rookie in the NWSL. She plays for Utah, but is from Jersey. And I'm pretty sure, like, I don't want to necessarily say I took credit. I'm not going to take credit for this, but I mean, if y'all want to give me credit, it's fine. But I'm pretty sure she's a Riveters fan now. Home team. But her and Soraya had a back and forth, Soraya Tinker, obviously. And that idea, even the style, like a hairstyle, is it appropriate just to like Rosie wears a bandana, but is there a way to be more representative even in different textures? I mean, I have curly hair. I would love to see like a curly haired Rosie, or a ponytail that has a little more texture to it. So I think even those things are important, but it is and can be and should be thoughtfully done, tastefully done, and factual and accurate. I think we're seeing mascot conversations on the men's side. Well, they've been having conversations about that, whole nother issue, but I like what you said about listening, right? Listening to fan bases, listening to community, listening to Black communities. And so we'll see. I'm keeping an eye on those developments quite closely.
It's easy. It's easy for us to make some of those changes. We have that perennial logo that's the helmet head that just says like NWHL on it. And that's a woman with long flowing, untextured hair. And so do we add a whole other line of that? That's curls, that's locks, that's braids. Why not? And that's the kind of way that you can immediately be culturally diverse, and you can immediately include folks that don't have to go buy a shirt with hair that they have to press or wear a weave or wear a wig or wear so on. Like, that's the only way they can look like that. Mm-hmm. And that's us projecting that that's what a ponytail should look like. And that's not right. And so some of those things immediately can be changed. And then some of the things that take more thought and take more progress will take longer. But those things need to be like conversations. And if we don't have those conversations and we don't feel comfortable being uncomfortable, then we're not going to progress forward. So I think that there's a lot of ways to immediately support and then thoughtfully support. And there's no way to do it without really listening. And that's, I think, the most important part of all of this is there's no conversation that we can spearhead, especially with an all white female leadership group. And my whole team is white. The whole NWHLPA is white. So there's no way that our groups can make this decision on behalf of. It can't happen. So there has to be more education in there.
as I've been doing this series, Anya, I've actually been learning a lot, which is why even, in my most tired, fatigued, or just overwhelmed days, it's been really great to continue to have these conversations. And one of them has also been how sports in general, but hockey fans have brought this to my attention, how there's also ableism, right, that happens in the hockey space. And there are defaults that we see as normal, or that we take for granted and make assumptions that hockey loving people, that they walk a certain way, that they talk a certain way, that they communicate in a certain way. And that's not the case. Even doing this series, I've been more mindful of fans that want to engage, but if I do a short teaser, you know, that and it doesn't have captions, that's something that then they have to find someone else to help with. And the reason I've been actually wanting to bring this conversation up with you is because I noticed with the first season for the Connecticut Whale that there were a lot of fans that communicated through sign language. And I thought it was great because their signs were always fire. First of all, always had amazing signs. But I noticed once as you were walking through the arena that you also sign. I'm just curious to learn that history, and if you can tell us a little bit about that the first few seasons of The Whale in particular, and that fan base.
Yes, I mean, deaf culture. Hi, it's so crazy to see everybody here, but my uncle is deaf, so I was raised learning sign language. I went on to college and petitioned to have sign language count as my foreign language, and it was an interesting conversation because I might learn Spanish or German or French or anything like that, but those people could always learn English. A deaf person can never learn to hear. So it was a very forward, progressive conversation where now Boston University recognizes sign language and American Sign Language as a foreign language. So for me, I know how close the deaf community is because there's no other way into it aside from learning to sign. There's no other way to include a deaf person unless they're going to assimilate by being able to read your lips. So I always feel like leaning in and supporting the deaf culture is super important. Deaf people are people, women's sports are sports. Deaf people are people. They want to engage and they want to love and they want to experience sports. And the best way to do that is being inclusive. So there's a gentleman, Doug, that does all of his signs about recaps on NHL games. I sent him a video back. That was really fun to just connect and watch ASL and NHL and now take on NWHL and talk about women's sports. And that's the best way to create those connectivities. So what I know and how I engage with my uncle and how I experience the deaf culture is what I want them to feel when they join the NWSL or women's sports in general, and knowing that it is kind of this feeling like this group of misfits, and how do we connect with all of these people, able people that can hear or can walk or all these different things. And I've been able to experience the deaf culture. I've also been able to play with the USA sled hockey team and get into a sled myself, and I was terrible at it, and it like completely blew my mind. So there's a lot of things that we have to do to continuously be progressive for all disabilities, for people of color, for LGBTQ youth, and that's where we have to push the envelope every day. So my experience with the deaf culture and the disabled culture and the gay culture and the LGBTQ plus culture helps me be a more well-rounded and open person when it comes to a problem. And I'm not Black, obviously, but what I know is you can't change your Blackness, just like a deaf person can't change their hearing, or a disabled person can't get up and start walking. And by ignoring those differences, and they're not challenges and they're not problems, they're nothing but just a simple difference, you're completely keeping a whole group outside, and we want everyone to be involved and a part of what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so I forget who was it that she was a teacher, right? At
Yeah,
a
you feel
American Sign
alone.
Language school. Okay, it was long. That's right, Michaela. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And so it was a lot of, I think, her colleagues that would come to Connecticut games.
Yeah, we would have a whole section of fans, and everyone would be cheering, and then you'd have a whole section going like this. And so we had to tell our bench, I was like, they're cheering, that's clapping for them. And they
Right.
would be like, oh, I didn't even like, they were like, what's that section of people that are just like,
Right. Just-
yes, because that's clapping, right? So then, after the game, we would start signing and Michaela and I would be in the autograph line and they'd be like, why do you guys take so long? I'm like, well, because half of our conversations have to happen with our hands. So it's crazy. It's crazy to see how the league has embraced that whole community. And also the youth that were there that just were excited, watching a deaf child experience hockey and have somebody there that could sign to them. They felt like they were a part of it. Watching a Black girl stand in the audience and see a Black player and think, oh my gosh, that could be me. That's unifying. That's the part of women's sports and women's hockey that I've been able to embrace in full. And I've been able to experience and makes me fall in love with our fan base and makes our fan base bigger and kinder and just so much better to one another.
Yeah, I think that again has been something that it was so cool to witness in the first season. But I think that's the work, right? Even though I knew and I had conversations with Michaela and actually one of her colleagues that would come to the game, and I had noticed, but it never really rose to a conversation, an ongoing conversation, or an exploration of that piece of um, NWHL culture, right? Or Connecticut whale culture. And that I think is what's so important. And what I hope this series will be is like an on ramp, but then also something that people can go back to and maybe hopefully just have a different perspective enough to ask questions or to seek out certain answers so that they can think differently the next time they walk into an ice rink. What things, in addition to conversations about how to be supportive of Black communities, would you also like to see the women's hockey space take on?
Yeah, we do a good job, in my opinion, championing a lot of things. So I think we do a great job when it comes to partnering with You Can Play, talking about LGBTQ, being the first league with a trans player, and creating that verbiage so that Harrison had his full ability and his full rights within himself. So I think that was really important for us. But what we don't often teeter into, and where I hope to see the largest change, is to have uncomfortable conversations about racism. And I get that that's kind of the same thing as championing for the Black community, but racism in hockey is real. And being able to look at a team and say, that's the team with the Black kid, or I'm playing against the team with the Chinese girl, or these are racist things. And it's because those people are different that we'll look at somebody and innately have thought that that wasn't racist. Like that was a descriptor when I was a kid. Oh, that's the kid, that's the team with the Black girl. But that's racist and that's wrong. And because our sport isn't more colorful, it seems more like an anomaly. And that's again another cultural problem that's larger because hockey's expensive. It's very particular to the area. It's not always a southern based sport. It's things that need to change on the wider scale. But what I don't feel like we recognize and what I don't feel like we do a good job with is, if I realize that I'm in a room of people that are bigoted, that aren't going to like the fact that I'm a lesbian, I can change my queerness. I can become a different person. I can either use different vernacular when I talk about my wife or not talk about my wife. I can say different things. I can behave differently. I don't walk down the street and look like a lesbian, but I am, and I'm queer, and that's my identifier. But I can certainly not say that when I walk into a room and feel uncomfortable. But that doesn't change for a Black person. And that's the biggest thing that we don't look at. We don't look at a team and say, oh, well, that's a half gay team. You don't do that. But you do identify people by their color because it's easier for people to just say, oh, well, that's okay. It's not. So when we start to identify how to stamp out racism, make it, more than just saying a racial slur, making just generalized racism inappropriate as a whole and actually changing that culture, that's when we are making real change. And it's, to just say, well, the W is mostly Black women, so they get it. No, everyone should get it. And if we don't get it and we're mostly not Black women, that's a problem. And it's not okay. So I think that obviously talking about elevating Black voices and being racially inclusive and all of those things is super important. But until we stamp out the most basic form of racism and start to include people at the base level, we aren't doing it right. And so that to me is one of the most important things. I don't think there's a lot of topics that we're afraid of. I think that we've done a good job with disabled fans, and whether that's physically disabled or hearing disabled or mentally disabled or any of these disabilities, right, that we bucket people off in. I think that as a whole, we can all be more accepting. And, Pride came out and then the flag started getting black and brown lines. And to me, I was like, this is actually what it's about. This is actually what America looks like. And until we make hockey feel like what America looks like, until we have people of color, I'm always so interested to hear about the Penguins organization and how well they do in Black girl hockey and all these different clubs, and how many of us there really are of allies and actual women of color that love this sport. Hire them, put them places, put them in our league, have them be mouthpieces, empower them to speak out. And that's what I think we've done a good job at. But until we stamp out most basic forms of racism and gates, barriers, like it's a barrier. And it's a barrier for a Black kid to feel like she's going to be on a completely white team and she's going to be the token Black kid. Until we stamp that out, we have bigger problems. And so I think that's the most important thing for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Have you, as executive director of the PA and maybe with the NWHL, have you had conversations about not only what that could have looked like for your season had been halted, or maybe more apropos coming up on season 6, about now learning the landscape, seeing what's been great, seeing maybe the missteps or places where sports has had to, hit pause. How do you think that will instruct what happens in the fall?
Yeah, there's a lot of committees that we've added. So one of the main committees that we've added is a COVID-19 support committee. And that's from a lot of different partners that we have, some of our insurance providers, from our partner in NYU, as well as the PA, the league head office, some private ownership groups, board members. We have some players on it. So it's actually it's crazy to get us all scheduled. But working with that group, what we learn every day is that it's a moving target. So how do we constantly innovate? How do we take others' missteps and create opportunities? And so in that, there's a lot of education. And what we find is we share this information. And from my side, just being dialed into so many different PAs, it's an open conversation of what's going on with COVID, what's working, what's not. And from that sharing of that mind trust that we've built, we're really trying to push the envelope of how to keep our athletes safe, how to ensure that we're not putting anyone at harm's risk, from staff to volunteers to potential fans or not, what that looks like. So there's a lot of information that's constantly flowing. And I'm excited about the way that we've handled the negotiations and the conversations to get back to play, that return to play model. So there's a lot of interest there. And I think what we've done really well is been lucky. Like there's a horseshoe in the NWHL's pocket right now because we missed one game, and then our whole offseason was during the majority of the scary outbreak, and now we're starting to watch leagues phase back in. But what we also have done really well is listen. And as much information as we can get, that's what we need. So I think we're, like I said, still aiming at that moving target. So it could change 15 times to Sunday. But it's been a really interesting conversation, and we've had a lot of very brilliant minds dive into it. I'm just sitting there. I'm not one of them.
You're just there.
I don't know.
Yeah, like anyone actually believes that. Stop it. That leads me to another question. Of course, COVID-19 has been, from a health perspective, very in everyone's face. But there is also another conversation that's been happening recently, certainly in the United States, and that's regarding social justice, racism, the movement for Black lives, particularly through Black Lives Matter, etc. Again, women's hockey has this opportunity. And as you know, I've been taking this time off, this off season to, well, it's not air quote off season, it's the actual off season, but like, like what, to have conversations that maybe the women's hockey space hasn't had before. And we're going to get into a deeper conversation on an episode of social justice in women's hockey. But I'd like to ask you, for our readers for the Nine, what have those types of conversations looked like from the PA perspective and in conversation with the league itself?
Yes, it's been another thing that's been spearheaded by other PAs, because as we watch different leagues return to play, we watch what they're doing and we watch how that is creating the positive conversations. And I actually thought it was very interesting. You tweeted about it, how sometimes we can derail the conversation by saying, well, she may be kneeling and she may be not kneeling. What does that mean? Instead, coming up with a cohesive plan that says, this is what we believe, this is the social justice that needs to be enacted, and this is how uniformly we're creating and deriving that change. So women's hockey, we're not in the same space as the W, where we have a large majority of our athletes in the Black community. But what we have is players in the Black community, and then also players that can be allies for the Black community. So we also have a large number of LGBTQ plus athletes that know what discrimination kind of feels like. And I always say kind of, because I can't take off, you can't take off your Blackness, but I could take off my gayness and say, oh, my husband, Matt, instead of my wife, Madison. So you can kind of normalize yourself. So I'm always like, no, you're kind of discriminated, but it's different. But anyway, so what we'll do in all of these is just host honest conversations. Like, we want to speak out on this, or like Angel McCoughtry did in the W. This is how we want to say her name. This is how we want to honor this or that. And knowing that when we make those decisions, we're making them thoughtfully. We're making them with the right advice from the people that affected or are affected the most. So we've empowered a lot of our Black athletes to speak out to us, to the league head office. This is what I want to see. And then we've identified how we can support. So I think there's a lot of social justice that needs to be taken on by athletes, because they're at the front of the conversation. They're in your face. They're the people that you champion and love and support. And if you can champion and love and support an NHL player or an NFL player when they're doing X, Y, and Z that might not be socially oriented, you're going to love and support your athlete when they do something like that. And it's going to create a conversation. So everything we do needs to be driven on the fact that the conversation needs to be genuine and pointed. It can't be distracting. It can't be, oh, she's not kneeling, or she's not wearing that helmet sticker, or whatever it may be. I want it to be something that doesn't take away from anything other than driving the positive social conversation.
Yeah, I think that is really important. And again, to reference something that happened in the National Women's Soccer League, where there was a conversation that I think took away, and Casey Short and Julie Ertz made a comment about that moment, and that was really a moment of faith and letting out some fears and concerns that they had, and it came out in an emotional way. But we've seen, particularly with the NWHL, and I've spoken to Allie Thunstrom about this in particular, but that there is, and Carly Lloyd, I think, is another player. There are times where a conversation that's happening right through a screen maybe doesn't hit the right notes, or is misinterpreted, or intent, is not fully understood. And that's something that Allie has had to deal with. Thinking about, just generally speaking, the opportunity to have an important conversation, but also the vulnerability of knowing that the important conversation will be difficult, and that there will be people that will misstep. How does that guide perhaps the supports that you, particularly as the PA, want to offer to players as you open up for them to share their experiences?
It makes a world of difference, right? Because what you think you're doing to support could actually be detrimental, or what you think you're saying in the purest form, you have a privilege that you might not understand how hurtful it might seem, And so I think that there's a lot that we can provide in terms of actual Black voices to educate our athletes, and not coming from me. It's disingenuous coming from me to be able to educate on a Black voice, but also appreciating that that person doing the educating doesn't have to or shouldn't have to. And so it kind of becomes this dichotomy where we want our athletes to be informed. We want them to know how to support or know what support looks like. I mean, sometimes even I will say, I'm going to be quiet today. You know, this isn't my conversation, but what I can do is elevate the right voices around me. And if that's how you have to perform your support, that's okay too. What does that mean? What does looking and listening and learning look like or feel like, or how does that actually turn into support instead of silence? So I've done a lot to educate myself and find the right tools that we can plug in to create a forum where our athletes are learning and understanding and further appreciating that it's not about them. You know, it's not about not saying that white lives, like it's not all lives matter. Yes, because if you're saying that, you agree that Black lives matter. You know, you're not understanding. And in that lack of understanding, you're being hurtful. And our athletes haven't said that, but it's said, and our athletes need to be comfortable to speak out because there's going to be challenging conversations, especially throughout the hockey community, who haven't been racially inclusive for a long time, that I know we're going to champion and I know we're going to do a great job because female athletes and especially female hockey players have never known in their locker rooms what racism is. You know, Blake is a friend. She's an athlete. She's actually way better than me. Like she's also someone I aspire to play like, but I never have looked at Blake and saw her as Black, but that's not okay for me to just say, I'm not racist. I know Blake, so I'm not racist. So instead, I have to learn how and why her road has been different than my road. And in that, I need to support her or support Soroya or support Michaela or support any of our athletes. Whitney Dubb. I mean, I could go on. Like we have athletes that are Black that need our support. And so I think coming from authentic Black voices and educating our athletes on what's right will help them understand how to navigate what could be tricky waters and be a good ally, not just be an ally.
Anya, while we have you for a few more minutes, I would love to switch gears a little bit and maybe um and talk about some of the things that you are excited about and that you are in conversation about when it comes to season 6. Again, you are planning a new season for your players amid a worldwide pandemic, amid very important but very difficult conversations about racism in the United States. And so, you know, I'm sure that that lens is impacting these conversations, but just generally, what, as I like to say, is on your whiteboard and how far along are you on ticking those things off?
The whiteboard is full. It's so full, but it's broken up now. So obviously there's a whole piece of the board that's about protection and safety for our players in terms of COVID-19. There's boards that we're on. There's different folks with just these brilliant minds that are helping educate us further on how to keep our players safe. But then on top of that, you have to add the lens of racism and you know, the cultural movements that are going on right now and how many oppressed voices are speaking out and actually shedding light on things that I would have never assumed were oppressive. And that to me has been extremely challenging. So that section of my whiteboard is basically just read this, watch this, learn this, listen to this, do this. And so there's a lot of what we need to do to provide the right amount of clarity and the right amount of insight so that we're being responsible and that we're using our voices for good. And then like the third section is also how do we continue to raise our revenues and increase funds and get our players more access to more and better. And so we've started going through processes with some pretty high up organizations to validate our athletes, whether that's getting them the blue check mark on Instagram or educating them further on social practices or making women's hockey instead of this very small niche that's just getting a piece of the spotlight. How do we amplify it? How do we grow our markets? Because people that are interested in the NWSL and the WNBA are naturally going to be interested in the NWHL. There's no barrier there. They support female athletes. They're usually very progressive. They want to know more. They want to continue to support. So how do we shine a continued light? And in all of those pieces, there's things that tie us and pull us together. like our Juneteenth cookout that we did with the WNBA PA, with the NWSL PA, with the US women's soccer team PA, these programs that we can kind of grab all three of those sections and slam them together. That's on there too. And it's important to educate, and it's important to use our voice, and it's important to draw on each other's successes and rise as a collective group. So my whiteboard is very full. I'm very close to some of it, and some of it feels like miles away. And, every day I get to go on our sponsorship calls with Danny Ryland. She includes me in full because we share our revenues 50-50 with the players in the league. So I know what the conversations are in the market. And so where, the COVID column and the continue to grow player salaries column interject is just brands are changing what they're doing with their marketing dollars. It's not as easy to just say, oh, well, you've spent perennially millions of dollars on men's sports. Give us 1% of that.
Right.
Their new answer is we're not spending those millions anymore.
Mm.
So what does that mean for our female athletes? What does that mean for our soccer players, for our basketball players, for our hockey players? It changes very dramatically. And often we're expected to take less. Oh, we'll give you a trade deal. We'll give you this product, or we'll give you this stuff, and you give us all this branding. And you would never go to a male league with that opportunity. It would never happen. You wouldn't disrespect them in that way. So it's been very challenging to watch the market change and watch marketing dollars shift and be strict to say, this is what we deserve, this is what we want, and this is how we're going to raise our players' salaries. So in sum, I think the whiteboard is super full, and I think every single conversation in there empowers me greatly because it affects every different bucket. It changes how safe our athletes are, how much they're being paid, but also how aware they are and how good they are at being actionable people in society that are being kind and nice and polite and respectful and elevate other folks and not take a movement like Black Lives Matter and make it introspective. It's not about me. It has nothing to do with me. And in this movement, I need to be the best support system to get that conversation off of the ground, that I can't take a second of it to think about myself. And being completely selfless is challenging. I'm not always the best at it. I certainly find ways to make lots of things about me. But in this conversation, you have to remove your ego. You have to. And you can't say, oh, well, I'm not racist. You have to actually be not racist. And you have to actually be the opposite of that, is complete equality. And that's what we want. That's what we're aiming for with Black Lives Matter. We want complete equality. And I saw this image that was like what people think Black Lives Matter is. And it was like all these different races, and this black bar was super, super high. And then it was like what Black Lives Matter actually is. And it was just all the same bars, and they were all equal. And that's where I was like, that's so powerful to think that all people want is just equality. I want it every day with my wife, myself, my son. I want these things. And I was so hurt last year when there was a straight pride parade. I was so hurt. And the pain I felt on that day doesn't even compare to Black people's pain every day. And that's where we have to remember that it's completely selfless in what we try to do. So the whiteboard is full.
Whiteboard is full. I want to offer this to you. And it's something actually that Harrison Brown told me in a conversation we had where I was letting him know that I was coming with a lot of ignorance to a conversation. And then I had to better equip myself because what I saw him post and how I felt were different.
Right.
And that made me uncomfortable, and it made me uncomfortable that I wasn't seeing something clearly. So what he said is like, well, first take yourself off the hook. So I'm going to take you off the hook for a little bit there. Like, yes, this conversation, the immediate conversation and the immediate care and the wraparound that is required is not about you. But I think what is also important to share is that the 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 act of allyship is not just to make allies feel better, and it's not just to make Black communities feel better. It is fundamental to us pushing forward, and it is fundamental that we empower everyone to have conversations because one, because of intersectionality, right? And we need to be supportive of all of who we are as often as possible, but also because of this concept of structural racism and how deep it is. That again, the reason that we're saying to lift up the voices of Black women in particular is because they often aren't. The reason that we say to lift up the voices of women is because they often aren't. And so that requires us all to do our part. So I think yes, like I think that there is a place for all of us, even as someone who identifies in the Black community, to sit back and sit with what I'm learning. But we also all have to take that opportunity when it comes to step up and to speak up. So that is what I would offer to you.
And it's hard. It's hard to know where your voice is empowering and where your voice is overshadowing. That's
Right.
one.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I think the education is so important. And I think that on all sides of every flip of this die, there needs to be education. There needs to be further education in the police. There needs to be further education for the white community. There needs to be further there needs to be education for the Black community. There needs to be education in the underprivileged areas, in the overprivileged areas, in every space. Learning, talking, hearing is of the utmost importance.
Yeah.
Because without a conversation, especially with a conversation that's going to challenge you or have a different opinion, and I'm so good at being like, this is my perspective, that's your perspective. I may not agree, but here's where I want to level set. And I think that type of an educational and intellectual conversation is so necessary. Because if at any point we turn our ears off and we just say, this is what it is, you're losing the ability to learn and you're losing the ability to grow. And so all of this is a stem of systemic ignorance, which turned into systemic racism, which turned into, all these different challenges with like the judicial system and that complete colossal mess up. And then how that affects communities and how that's oppressive. And learning about that for me was one of those things where like my wife loves documentaries and we watched Khalif Browder the minute it came out and we watched these things and we learned about Rikers Island and we were like, how do we do something? And that without the education is where you will stop. You're like, that sucks, but I can't do anything about it. But you can. And so educating yourself constantly and from every different angle is how we actually create change. And I think that's when I look at this problem, I look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm completely ignorant. I need to learn. You don't go walk in and start sewing up stitches. You go, right. I don't know how to do that. Let me learn that. So I think that there's definitely a wound in America right now. And I think that the way to stitch it up is to educate. And that takes all sides educating, coming together and being willing and not necessarily looking at your Black friends and saying, tell me what to do, because that's inappropriate and that's not their job. And so we have to take this with such grace to learn and educate and find the right tools. And that doesn't always mean appointing a bunch of Black women to an inclusivity board that they then have to do all the work.
Yeah, no lie detected. Anya, it's always truly a pleasure to chat with you. I'm glad that you were able to offer your voice and your perspective to this conversation. And I mean, this is a series. I'm not putting a cap on it, so we'll see where it goes. But looking forward to season 6. And of course, everything that you have on that whiteboard, hopefully coming to fruition in the best way possible for your players.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And this conversation is so important. It's helped me very, very much to be introspective and look at what we're doing and see problems and to see voices that actually are very powerful that I've not taken and amplified in a way that I wish I had. So it's been very eye-opening for me, and it's helped me better understand. And listening to Ari and listening to different people, like I was listening to Natasha Cloud, I'm just listening. And so all these different people and women in sports that are willing to have these uncomfortable conversations is so important. So actually, I thank you. I mean, I'm happy to talk, but all I'm doing is just trying to understand. So thank you for this. I think it's given a lot of people a place to unburden themselves and learn and not feel like we're doing the wrong thing, but more that we can not necessarily just feel like, oh, I checked that box today. I did that thing, but really I learned and I listened. So more, thank you for having uncomfortable conversations in women's sports. You are always my favorite talk and conversation and just challenge and all these different things. But it's so important. And I literally, like, round of applause for your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But you gave Ari a shout out. I'm going to use this as an opportunity. She better be watching. She needs to come to a hockey game.
Yes.
We'll keep you safe. We're not going to let you get hit by a puck. So throw that out.
I'm not going to go on the ice. I'm not going to put you in a penalty box.
Right, exactly.
Like growling Kaylee Frecken or something.
Exactly.
Fine.
We'll get you VIP. Like, come on. But come through, sis. Come through.